Welcome to our deep dive into psychology. You want to understand the history of it, the research, the big debates, right?
Yes, huge field.
We've got some really good stuff to dig into, like academic books, the great ideas of psychology, that kind of thing. So we're talking centuries of thought, experiments, completely changing how we think about the mind.
It is amazing to see how psychology has gone from just like philosophy to a field that now includes biology, behavior, AI.
Let's start way back. Ancient Greece, that inscription, know thyself at the Temple of Delphi. It wasn't just a saying, it really kicked off this whole idea of understanding yourself, which is
Yeah,
still so important in psychology
sure.
today.
You see that. Yeah.
And even think about Homer, with his stories, his observations of people, he was kind of already hinting at what would become big ideas in psychology, like motivations and understanding yourself to make sense of why you do
Yeah,
things.
he was like laying the groundwork for Plato and Aristotle to come along and really get into those big questions. And they didn't agree on everything, did they?
No, not at all.
Plato, with his ideas about like innate knowledge, true forms, he believed that we understand the world from within. Through reasoning and tapping into those forms. It's a very top-down way to look at knowledge.
So for Plato, it was all about introspection, looking inward to find truth.
Exactly.
But Aristotle was a bit more hands-on, right? He had a different approach.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Aristotle, he was all about observation, experience, and like integrating all these aspects of life, biological, social, political, to understand what it means to be human. It's more holistic, bottom-up, focused on like the interplay between you and your environment.
So two brilliant minds, two contrasting views.
Two very different ways of seeing the world.
And these different views, they keep popping up throughout the history of psychology. Now let's jump ahead a bunch of centuries. You've got figures like Francis Bacon and Isaac Newton. They really put science on the map, didn't they?
Absolutely. They really pushed for the scientific method, saying, hey, you've got to observe, you've got to experiment, you've got to search for evidence you can actually verify. This was huge for psychology because it paved the way for a more empirical approach to understanding the mind.
And then you've got John Locke, totally inspired by Newton, saying the mind is like a blank slate, right? Just shaped by experiences. His book, Essay Concerning Human Understanding, was a game changer.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It gave us a framework for how we understand things, how we learn. It shifted the focus from those innate ideas that Plato talked about to the role of sensory experience in shaping our understanding of the world. It was a big change from Plato's thinking, setting the stage for this more like mechanistic view of the mind.
So they were trying to crack the code of the mind.
Yeah, trying to figure out how we turn experiences into knowledge.
And some thinkers took this mechanistic view even further. People like Hobbes, Lemaitre, they said we're basically just machines. It makes you wonder, where's the self in all of this?
That's the question, isn't it? As the focus went to like the physical workings of the brain, that concept of the self or the soul, it became harder to grasp. It's this tension between like the material and the immaterial. People are still debating this today.
It's a big one. And this focus on the physical led to some interesting detours. Phrenology, for example. I mean, who thought bumps on your head could tell you about your personality?
Well, yeah, phrenology, definitely wrong turn. But it shows how fascinated we are with connecting the physical structure of the brain to like mental traits and abilities. It's a theme that keeps coming back in different forms throughout the history of psychology.
For sure. And speaking of connecting the physical and the mental, psychophysics really changed how we study perception. Weber, with his research on touch, how we tell the difference between weights. He basically cracked the code.
Yeah, his research gave us a Weber's law, which is this basic principle about the relationship between how strong a stimulus is and that just noticeable difference, the tiniest change you can actually detect. It's not about the absolute difference, but like the proportion.
So a small weight added to something light is more noticeable than the same weight added to something heavy.
Right. It's not the absolute difference, but the proportion that matters.
Makes sense. It's like our senses are tuned to relative changes, not the absolute amounts.
Exactly. And then Fettner, he took Weber's work and ran with it. He developed psychophysics, trying to mathematically quantify the relationship between like a physical thing you sense and the subjective feeling you get.
Wow, so they were figuring out how to measure something as subjective as perception. That's amazing.
Yeah, they were pioneers in figuring out how our senses work, how they really function. That set the stage for later research on vision, hearing, all of that.
So let's talk about vision. It's pretty incredible how our eyes can detect super faint light, all those colors, and they adapt to different lighting conditions.
And the key to all that is the duplex nature of our vision. We've got rods. They're sensitive in low light, but they don't do color. And we've got cones. They're all about color vision, but they need more light. That's why our peripheral vision is mostly rods. It's not as sharp and doesn't have as much color as our central vision.
So it's like having two systems working together to give us this full picture.
Yeah, like a tag team for your eyes.
And then color blindness, that just shows how complex this all is.
Oh yeah, color blindness, that comes from problems with the cones, those pigments in the cones. It really highlights how intricate the biology is behind something we think of as simple, just seeing color.
It reminds us that even our basic senses involve all these complex neural pathways and chemical stuff going on.
Totally.
Now, let's shift gears to hearing. So it's all about our ears decoding those vibrations, those pressure waves in the air that we experience as sound, right?
Exactly. And the inner ear is where the magic happens, specifically that basilar membrane. So different parts of it vibrate depending on the frequency of the sound. That's how we tell high pitches from low pitches.
It's like our inner ear is doing a Fourier transform on the sound waves, breaking them down into all those frequencies.
Exactly.
Right.
And then as this information travels to the brain, it gets even more refined.
So the nervous system isn't just sending signals, it's actually processing and sharpening them.
It's more than just a relay station. It's actively shaping the information.
That's wild. But what's even cooler is how our perception is influenced by more than just those raw sensory inputs. Like signal detection theory, that tells us we're not just passively taking in information, we're filtering and interpreting it based on all sorts of things.
Oh yeah, for sure. Our expectations, the context, even our emotions, all that plays a role in what we perceive.
Yeah.
Like, you're more likely to hear your name across a noisy room if you're expecting someone to call you.
Right, like your brain prioritizes certain things based on how important they are to you.
Exactly. And then you have these things like perceptual constancies and illusions. Our brains, they use what they already know about the world to make sense of what we're seeing, even if that means taking shortcuts or creating illusions.
Like when you see a friend walking away from you, you know they haven't actually shrunk, even though their image in your eye is getting smaller.
Exactly. Your brain's like, I know how objects work. They don't just shrink like that.
Our brains are filling in the gaps based on what they know about the world.
Totally. And all those crazy illusions, the ones that make you question reality, they show us how complex the connection is between perception and knowledge.
So let's talk about memory now. It's something that's always fascinated people. Like the saying, practice makes perfect. That gets at the idea that practice helps you remember things. But how does that actually work?
Well, Aristotle had this idea of memory traces, that when you experience something repeatedly, it leaves a physical mark on the brain.
It's like etching it in so you can access it later.
Yeah, it's a really early attempt to explain how memories are formed and stored.
Pretty cool. And then we have Hermann Ebbinghaus. He was all about studying memory in a scientific way.
Ebbinghaus, he was so precise, he used nonsense syllables, like MIB or 2J, to study memory in a very controlled way, getting rid of any effects of prior knowledge.
He wanted to see how we learn and remember completely new stuff, right?
Exactly. And one of the things he found was the savings method, which showed that it takes less time to relearn something than to learn it the first time.
Even if it feels like you've forgotten everything.
Even then, it suggests that something's still there, some trace of the original learning.
That's so fascinating. And he also found the serial position effect. People remember the beginning and end of a list better than the middle.
It's like our memory likes first impressions and grand finales.
He was a real pioneer in memory research, showing us how we learn and forget.
His work was huge.
And speaking of learning, we can't forget about conditioning and the legend Ivan Pavlov and his dogs.
Pavlov was studying digestion when he stumbled onto something much bigger, classical conditioning. He noticed that his dogs started salivating, not just when they saw food, but when they heard the person who brought the food coming.
It's like they learned to anticipate the food even before they saw it.
Right. And then he started doing these experiments where he paired a neutral sound, like a bell, with the food.
So the bell becomes associated with the food.
Exactly. After a while, the dogs would start salivating just to the bell, even without the food.
So the bell, which was originally meaningless, became the conditioned stimulus, and the drooling in response to the bell was the conditioned response.
Exactly. Pavlov showed that we form associations between things, even if those associations seem random at first.
And Pavlov really believed that understanding these biological processes was the key to understanding the mind.
It was a very biological approach, viewing behavior as a product of the brain and nervous system.
It makes sense. And then as we move into the 20th century, we have B.F. Skinner, who was all about operant conditioning, a different type of learning.
Skinner was a different kind of thinker.
He was all about focusing on observable behavior, how our actions are shaped by their consequences.
He believed that psychology should be a purely descriptive science, based on what you can see and measure. He emphasized reinforcement, anything that makes a behavior more likely to happen again.
So instead of focusing on what's going on inside the mind, Skinner focused on the external stuff, right? The rewards and punishments that shape our actions.
Exactly. He studied things like different schedules of reinforcement, like how often and when you give rewards affects learning. Like with continuous reinforcement, you reward every response, but then if the rewards stop, the behavior stops too.
Like if you get a treat every time you press a button, you learn fast, but if the treats stop, you start pressing the button.
Right, but with other schedules, like fixed ratio or variable ratio, the rewards are less predictable. That makes the behavior more persistent, even when you don't get rewarded every time.
Like with slot machines, you keep pulling the lever hoping for that win, even though you know it probably won't happen.
Exactly. Skinner even tried to explain language, this super complex human thing, as just another behavior shaped by reinforcement.
And that's where he ran into trouble, right, with Noam Chomsky and the linguists.
Oh yeah, Chomsky really took issue with Skinner's take on language. He argued that language is far too complex and creative to be explained by just reinforcement.
Chomsky said, look, we can create totally new sentences we've never heard before, and kids learn language so quickly. He was pointing to stuff like the structure of language, how it's similar across cultures, how we can come up with new sentences, and the fact that there's like a critical period for learning language when you're young.
Right. And all of that was evidence for him that language is more than just learned associations.
It's like we're born with this capacity for language, this blueprint for grammar that allows us to pick it up so easily when we're kids.
Yeah, and that idea, along with research on animals and how they think, it really challenged behaviorism. That very strict focus on observable behavior.
And that's what led to the cognitive revolution, right?
Exactly. That's when the pendulum swung back towards the mind. People started focusing on the mind as an active processor of information again.
It was a huge shift in how we thought about psychology. And it opened up so many possibilities for studying memory, attention, problem solving, all that stuff.
Oh yeah, and even consciousness itself.
Consciousness.
This whole new world was opening up.
And it's a world we're still exploring today, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cognitive psychology is still going strong, branching out into things like cognitive neuroscience, which looks at the brain and how it works, and artificial intelligence, which tries to create machines that can think like us.
It's amazing to think about all the directions psychology is moving in.
It makes you realize how much we've learned, but also how much is still out there to discover.
It's amazing how we went from behaviorism being the dominant force to this focus on the mind as an information processor. It really broadened the scope of what psychology could explore.
It's like the floodgates opened, and we could finally look at all those internal mental processes that make us who we are. But this exploration didn't stop there, did it? It went even deeper, to the very organ that houses all of this mental activity, the brain.
Right, the physical stuff.
And one of the key figures in this journey was Paul Broca, a French surgeon who made a groundbreaking discovery in the mid-1800s. He had this patient who could only say one word, tan, even though he seemed to understand language.
Yeah, I remember reading about that case. So sad.
When the patient died, Broca did an autopsy and found damage to a specific area in the left frontal lobe of the brain, which we now call, well, Broca's area. This was huge because it was one of the first clear demonstrations that different parts of the brain have different functions.
It's like this region of the brain is specialized for speech production. Damage to that area and boom, you have trouble speaking. It's a pretty powerful example of the brain-behavior connection.
And then later, Karl Wernicke, a German neurologist, discovered another area in the brain, further back in the temporal lobe, that's crucial for language comprehension.
So if that area is damaged, you might be able to speak fluently, but the words you're saying don't make any sense, and you have trouble understanding what others are saying.
That's like the wires are crossed.
Yeah, exactly. And these discoveries, along with studies of split brain patients where the connection between the two hemispheres of the brain is severed, really drove home the point that the brain isn't just one big homogeneous blob. It's got specialized regions, each with its own specific job to do.
And all of these regions work together in this incredibly complex and coordinated way to produce all the things we think of as the mind. But we're not just thinking machines, are we? We've got emotions, too, which play a huge role in shaping our behavior.
Emotions are so central to who we are and how we experience the world.
And as we delved deeper into the brain, we started to understand the neural basis of emotions, too. There was this research with monkeys that really highlighted the role of the limbic system. The limbic system, that network of brain structures involved in emotion, motivation, memory.
Oh yeah, the Kluver-Bucy syndrome.
Yeah.
That was a pretty wild set of findings.
Mhm.
So they removed the temporal lobes in these monkeys, and their behavior changed dramatically.
They became super docile, they lost their fear responses, they were hypersexual, and they even started putting objects in their mouths, like they were exploring the world through taste. It was like their emotional landscape had been completely altered.
It's like that part of the brain was inhibiting those behaviors before, and when it was gone, they just went wild.
Hmm.
It was a pretty dramatic example of how specific brain regions are involved in emotional regulation. But it's not just nature, right? It's nurture, too. Our experiences and environment also shape our emotions.
Yeah, for sure. It's not just about our genes or the physical structure of our brains. Our experiences, our interactions with the world, they all leave their mark on our emotional development. Like there was this research on predatory behavior in animals, and they found that even something like that, which seems so instinctive, can be modified by experience. They exposed some animals to prey early in life, and guess what? It actually reduced their predatory aggression. It's amazing. Like they learned to inhibit that instinctual response because of their early experiences.
It's pretty wild how adaptable behavior can be.
Hmm.
It shows how genes and environment are constantly interacting, shaping each other. It's not a simple one or the other situation.
Yeah, it's this constant back and forth between nature and nurture. And then you've got the discovery of pleasure and pain centers in the brain, which is a whole other can of worms. I mean, if you can stimulate a specific spot in the brain and make someone feel intense pleasure or pain, does that mean we're just at the mercy of our brain chemistry?
Right. It makes you question the whole idea of free will. Like, are we really making choices or are we just puppets of our neurons? It's a pretty big question. And it gets even more complicated when you think about things like the insanity defense in legal cases. You have these situations where someone commits a crime, but there's evidence that they were experiencing some kind of brain abnormality, like a tumor or damage to a certain part of the brain.
So, how do you hold someone accountable for their actions if their brain is literally not working properly? I mean, where do you draw the line between responsibility and a lack of control due to something biological?
It's a tough one for sure. There's this tension between wanting to hold people responsible for their actions, to maintain justice, and also recognizing that sometimes those actions might not be entirely their fault.
It's this recognition that maybe they didn't have full control over their behavior, like their brain was hijacked by something outside of their control. And this ties into the whole medical model of mental illness, which views mental disorders as, well, diseases, just like physical diseases, but in this case, the disease is in the brain.
This model has been huge in psychiatry, leading to the development of all these medications to treat mental illness, like antidepressants, which aim to boost serotonin levels, or antipsychotics, which target dopamine activity.
So it's about identifying those biological imbalances, those chemical disruptions in the brain that are contributing to those symptoms, and then using medications to try to correct them.
Right, it's a very biological approach. But it's important to remember that it's not the whole story. Mental illness is rarely, if ever, just about a chemical imbalance. It's usually a combination of factors. You've got biological vulnerabilities, maybe genetic predispositions, but you've also got stressful life events, trauma, learned patterns of behavior, and the social environment. All these things are interacting in complex ways.
So it's like trying to understand a car engine by just looking at the spark plugs. You might get some information, but you're missing the whole picture, right? Like you're neglecting the fuel system, the transmission, the driver, the road conditions.
Exactly. And that's why it's crucial to consider other perspectives too, like psychodynamic theory, with its focus on unconscious conflicts and early childhood experiences. Cognitive behavioral therapy, which looks at how our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are interconnected. And humanistic psychology, with its emphasis on personal growth and self-actualization. They all offer valuable insights into the origins and treatment of mental illness.
It's not about picking one approach and sticking with it, but recognizing that these different perspectives can complement each other, each highlighting a different piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, it's about taking a more holistic view of mental health, considering all the factors that might be contributing to someone's distress.
And speaking of puzzles, let's talk about artificial intelligence, or AI, a field that's both fascinating and a little bit scary. I mean, we're talking about creating machines that can think, learn, and maybe even become smarter than us.
AI is moving so fast. It's mind-blowing what these systems can do now. They're beating grandmasters at chess, writing music, composing poetry, and even having conversations that are almost indistinguishable from humans.
It's like we're blurring the lines between human and machine intelligence.
And that raises some pretty profound questions like, what does it even mean for a machine to be intelligent? How do we measure intelligence in a machine?
Some people argue that true intelligence requires consciousness, self-awareness, and the ability to experience the world subjectively. But others say that maybe consciousness is just an emergent property of complex systems. So as AI systems get more sophisticated, they might develop some form of consciousness, even if it's not exactly like ours.
It's a mind-bending thought, like, could we create machines that not only think but also feel?
It's both exciting and a little bit unnerving, right?
Definitely. And if we do manage to create sentient machines, it raises all sorts of ethical dilemmas, like, what are our responsibilities to these beings? Do they deserve rights, similar to the rights we give to humans?
And do we have the right to enslave a sentient machine, even if it's one that we created?
It's like science fiction becoming reality.
But these are questions we need to start thinking about now, because AI technology is advancing so rapidly. We need to be prepared for the ethical challenges that come with creating truly intelligent machines.
It's about ensuring that as we develop AI, we do so ethically and responsibly, with a focus on the well-being of both humans and machines.
It's about shaping a future where AI doesn't replace us, but rather augments our abilities and helps us create a better world. But for now, let's step back from the world of artificial intelligence and delve into the very real and very human world of social psychology.
Social psychology is all about understanding how we interact with each other, how our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are shaped by the people around us, by the groups we belong to, by the social roles we inhabit, and even just by the imagined presence of an audience.
It's like zooming out from the individual mind and looking at the bigger picture, those social forces that are constantly shaping our behavior.
And this brings us back to Aristotle's fourfold theory of causality. He argued that to really understand social events, we need to consider not just the physical mechanisms of processes involved, but also the purposes or intentions behind those actions.
So it's not just about how something happened, but also why it happened.
Exactly. What was the goal? What was the motivation behind that behavior? And to answer those questions, you often need to take a more natural history approach, similar to what Darwin did with evolution. It's about observing behavior in its natural context, trying to identify patterns and interpret those patterns to understand the underlying social dynamics.
It's like becoming a social anthropologist, immersing yourself in different social environments and trying to make sense of all the subtle cues, the unwritten rules, the rituals that shape human behavior.
And we see this approach used in a lot of different areas of psychology, like in Freudian psychoanalysis, where therapists delve into their patients' life histories to uncover unconscious motives and conflicts, or in the study of social movements, where researchers try to understand how collective action emerges and how groups mobilize to bring about social change.
It's amazing how this natural history lens can be applied to both individual and collective behavior, recognizing that our actions are rarely isolated events. They're always happening within this complex web of social relationships, cultural norms, and historical influences.
And understanding that social context is so important. It helps us make sense of our own behavior, as well as the behavior of others. It's about seeing beyond those individual actions and appreciating those bigger forces that shape who we are and how we act.
And a big part of who we are is our personality. It's what makes us unique, those enduring patterns of thinking, feeling, and acting that differentiate us from one another.
Personality psychology is all about trying to capture those patterns, organizing them into meaningful categories, and understanding what factors contribute to our unique personalities.
It's like mapping the human landscape of individuality.
And we've got a bunch of different theories that focus on different aspects of personality, like the five-factor model, which identifies 5 broad dimensions of personality: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism.
So it's a way of categorizing personality traits.
Right, it gives us a common language to describe how people differ. But then you've got other theories like psychodynamic theory and social learning theory, which go deeper, exploring those unconscious drives, early childhood experiences, and social influences that shape who we become.
It's like peeling back the layers of the onion, trying to figure out all the factors that contribute to our unique personalities.
And this understanding of personality can be really useful in different fields. Like in clinical psychology, therapists use personality assessments to get a better understanding of their clients. Or in organizations, they use personality tests to help with hiring decisions and building teams that work well together.
It's fascinating how these insights into personality can be applied in so many different ways. But it's important to remember that personality is complex. No single theory can capture the full richness of human individuality.
It's a reminder that while we strive to understand the patterns that make us who we are, we also need to appreciate the uniqueness of each person. And this appreciation for individuality is even more important when we consider how powerful the situation can be, how social pressures and context can influence our behavior in surprising ways.
Like in those classic social psychology experiments, Solomon Asch's conformity studies showed how people conform to the group, even when the group is obviously wrong.
It's like this deep-seated desire to fit in, to go along with the crowd, even if it means ignoring our own judgment. And then there's Stanley Milgram's obedience experiments. Remember those? Where participants were willing to deliver what they thought were painful electric shocks to another person, simply because an authority figure told them to.
Those experiments were so controversial, but they revealed this disturbing truth about human nature, how susceptible we are to obeying authority, even when it goes against our moral compass.
It's a really sobering thought. And then there's Philip Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment, where just assigning people to roles, either guard or prisoner, led to this rapid escalation of abusive behavior.
It shows how powerful rules can be, how easily we can slip into patterns of behavior that we might never have imagined ourselves doing.
It's like the situation, the context, the roles we're playing, they can sometimes override our individual personalities and bring out the best or the worst in us.
These experiments, while ethically challenging, really force us to confront those darker aspects of human nature, the potential for cruelty and conformity that exists within us all.
It's a stark reminder that understanding behavior requires looking beyond the individual and considering the power of the situation.
So it's not just about who you are, but also where you are, who you're with, and what the social norms and expectations are in that particular context.
Exactly. And this awareness is so important for creating environments that promote positive behavior and minimize the risk of harm, like understanding the bystander effect, where the presence of others can actually inhibit helping behavior. It's a counterintuitive finding, but it's been observed in so many tragic situations.
Like in the infamous Kitty Genovese case, where she was murdered while 38 people reportedly witnessed the attack but didn't intervene. It's chilling to think that our instinct to help, that sense of empathy and compassion, can be overridden by the presence of others.
It's like we get caught up in this diffusion of responsibility. When there are multiple witnesses, we each feel less personally obligated to act.
We assume someone else will call for help, or that someone else is better equipped to handle the situation. And the more people there are, the less likely anyone is to take action.
It's a tragedy of inaction, and understanding the bystander effect is crucial for creating societies where people feel empowered to help, where we don't just stand by and watch when someone is in need.
It's about fostering a sense of collective responsibility, a willingness to step up and act, even when others are present.
And this brings us to the issue of prejudice, a pervasive and destructive force that continues to plague societies around the world. It's the act of prejudging someone based on their group membership, whether it's race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, or any other social category that sets people apart.
It's about making assumptions about people, usually negative assumptions, without really knowing them as individuals.
And prejudice can manifest in so many ways, from subtle biases and microaggressions to overt discrimination and even violence.
We've seen throughout history how prejudice has fueled some of the worst atrocities imaginable, from slavery to genocide. It's a powerful reminder of how dangerous and destructive it can be.
And while we've made some progress in combating prejudice, it's still a deeply ingrained problem, often operating below the level of conscious awareness. We might not even realize we're harboring prejudices until we see them play out in our own behavior or the behavior of others.
It's like those implicit biases we all carry, those unconscious associations we make between certain groups and specific traits or stereotypes. They can influence our perceptions and actions without us even realizing it.
Social psychology research has really shed light on the cognitive mechanisms that drive prejudice, like how our brains categorize information, form stereotypes, and create those us versus them distinctions.
It's almost like our brains are wired to simplify the world, to create categories, but that can sometimes lead to overgeneralizations and biases.
Exactly. And understanding those cognitive processes is key to developing effective strategies to combat prejudice. It's about challenging stereotypes, promoting intergroup contact, fostering empathy, and recognizing our shared humanity.
It's about building bridges instead of walls.
And that leads us to the idea that reality is socially constructed. I mean, think about it. Our perceptions of the world, even things we think of as objective truths, are shaped by our social interactions, cultural norms, and the language we use to make sense of it all.
It's like we're not just passively observing reality, we're actively creating it through our interactions with each other and the world around us.
Exactly. And this idea was really highlighted in David Rosenhan's famous study on being sane in insane places. He had these perfectly sane people get themselves admitted to psychiatric hospitals. And even though they acted completely normal once they were in, their behavior was still interpreted as evidence of mental illness simply because of the context they were in.
It's like the label mentally ill became a self-fulfilling prophecy, shaping how their actions were perceived. It's a pretty powerful example of how our social environment can influence our perceptions of reality.
And this brings us to a topic that's been debated for centuries. Intelligence. What is intelligence? How do we measure it? And why does it matter so much?
Traditional views of intelligence, the ones that focus on IQ tests and scores, have come under a lot of fire, haven't they?
Oh yeah, for sure. There are all these concerns about cultural bias, about how IQ tests really only measure a narrow range of cognitive abilities, and how they don't really predict real-world success all that well. It's like trying to capture the vastness of the ocean with a teacup.
And this narrow view of intelligence has real-world consequences too, because it often gets used to justify social hierarchies and inequality. It's like saying, you have a high IQ, therefore you're more deserving of opportunities and resources. But what about all the other forms of intelligence that aren't captured by those tests?
Right. Things like creativity, emotional intelligence, practical problem-solving skills, those are all important too.
And Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences really challenged that traditional view. He argued that there are multiple types of intelligence, not just one. You've got linguistic intelligence, musical intelligence, spatial intelligence, bodily kinesthetic intelligence, interpersonal intelligence, intrapersonal intelligence, and so on.
It's a much more inclusive view of intelligence, recognizing that people can excel in different ways.
And this more expansive understanding of intelligence has huge implications for education, for how we value different skills and talents, and for how we create a society that nurtures the potential of all individuals.
It's about recognizing that intelligence isn't a one-size-fits-all concept. There are many different ways to be smart.
And all of this discussion about intelligence and about behavior in general brings us to another age-old debate. Determinism versus free will. If our genes, our brain chemistry, and our experiences shape who we are, does that mean we really have the freedom to choose our own paths?
It's a question that philosophers have wrestled with for centuries, and psychology just adds another layer of complexity.
Like, behaviorism argues that we're largely products of our environment, shaped by the rewards and punishments we've experienced throughout our lives. Psychoanalysis suggests that our choices might be driven by unconscious desires and conflicts that we're not even aware of. And neuroscience shows us how our thoughts and actions are ultimately reducible to those neural processes, the firing of neurons and the release of neurochemicals.
So are we really in control, or are we just playing out a script that's already written in our brains? It's a question that continues to spark debate and inspire research.
And it's not just a theoretical debate. It has real-world implications for things like personal responsibility, morality, and even the legal system.
Right. If someone's actions are predetermined by their biology or by their past experiences, can we truly hold them accountable for their choices?
And even if we acknowledge the role of biological and environmental factors, there's still this sense that we do have some level of agency, that we can make choices and shape our own destinies.
It's that feeling of I that seems to defy simple explanations. And this is where the concept of compatibilism comes in, trying to reconcile the idea of free will with the notion that our choices are influenced by factors outside of our control.
It's about acknowledging the constraints, but also recognizing the possibility for choice within those constraints.
It's a tricky balance, but it's one that we need to grapple with as we try to understand the complexities of human behavior.
Well, this has been quite a journey through the world of psychology, from ancient Greek philosophy to modern neuroscience, from the intricacies of perception to the power of the situation. We've covered a lot of ground.
We've explored how the field has evolved over time, challenged traditional views, and expanded our understanding of what it means to be human. But even with all the progress we've made, there are still so many questions to be answered.
Psychology is a constantly evolving field, with new discoveries and new challenges emerging all the time. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I hope you'll walk away with a sense of both the vastness of what we know and the even greater vastness of what we still don't know.
It really highlights the vast scope of psychology, how it pulls from philosophy, biology, sociology, even computer science, to try to understand what it means to be human.
It's been a wild ride through history, research, all those big debates that shape how we see ourselves and each other.
Yeah, it's amazing to see how psychology has gone from just philosophical discussions to a field that uses hard science, brain scans, even computers to try and model the mind.
It's taken us from ancient Greece, know thyself, and all that, to modern labs where scientists are mapping the brain, figuring out consciousness, even exploring whether AI could be as smart as us or even smarter.
Crazy, right?
And it makes you think about that tension between the people who want to understand the mind through science, reducing our thoughts and feelings to something you can measure, and the people who say the human experience is just, well, more than that.
That's been a theme throughout the history of psychology, hasn't it?
Yeah, going all the way back to Plato and Aristotle.
Plato was all about reason and innate knowledge, while Aristotle was focused on observation and the role of experience.
And then more recently, you had behaviorism, which was all about observable behavior and how the environment shapes us, versus cognitive psychology, which was all about those internal mental processes that shape how we understand the world.
Two very different ways of looking at things.
Yeah, and those two sides are still going at it today.
It's like a constant tug of war.
On the one hand, you've got the people who say the mind is like any other part of nature, something we can study objectively. Our thoughts and feelings, they're just the product of what's happening in the brain, all those neurons firing and chemicals doing their thing.
And that perspective has led to some huge advances, like neuroscience, where we can actually see what's going on in the brain. We can map those neural pathways, figure out which parts of the brain are active during certain tasks, and even develop medications to address chemical imbalances that might be contributing to mental illness.
But then you've got the other side, the people who say that reducing the human experience to just brain activity misses the point. Like, they argue that subjective experience, what it feels like to be human, that's something science can't fully explain.
Right. Like, how do you measure the feeling of love or the awe you feel when you see a beautiful sunset? Those are things that just go beyond scientific measurement.
They argue that we're not just machines reacting to stimuli, but conscious beings who can think about ourselves, create art, feel empathy, and have a sense of purpose.
And I think both sides have a point.
I agree.
Right.
And that tension between the scientific and the humanistic, the objective and the subjective, it's not a bad thing. It's actually what makes psychology so fascinating.
It forces us to think about those big questions, the ones that have been around for centuries. What does it mean to be human? What is consciousness? Do we have free will?
And these aren't questions that have easy answers.
Nope, they might not even have answers at all.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into psychology, I want to leave you with one final question to ponder, something to chew on as you continue your own exploration of this amazing field.
Like a little food for thought.
If all our thoughts and feelings, our hopes and dreams, everything we experience is just a result of physical processes in the brain, does that make those experiences any less real or any less meaningful?
I don't know, what do you think?
Honestly, I'm not sure, but it's something I'll definitely be thinking about, and I hope you will too. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and maybe one day we'll have some answers, or at least some better questions. And that's it for our deep dive into the world of psychology. Thanks for listening.